All right, good morning. My name is Jeff Prosek. I'm a second-year MBA student at MIT Sloan, and I'm the student lead for the Athlete Analytics panel. Very excited to introduce this panel that we have here today. Just a great lineup of speakers. And we have John Brankus, the creator and host of the multi-Emmy award-winning Sports Science. Kezar Hassanji from Adidas. We have two Colts quarterbacks with us today, Matt Hasselbeck and Andrew Luck. We have Dr. Adir Schiffman from Catapult Sports. And then our moderator is Shira Springer from the Boston Globe. One last note before I kick it over to Shira. The panel's going to run until 10. We're going to try to leave about 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions. If you have questions, you can either text or tweet those questions in. If you're going to text them in, text them to the number 22333, as if 22333 is a phone number or a contact that you're texting to. And start your question with the word athlete. For tweets, you can tweet at poll, P-O-L-L, and start your tweet with athlete as well, and please include hashtag SSAC14. With that, I'll kick it over to Shira.
Thanks, Jeff, and thank you all for coming. I think when I was brainstorming ideas for questions about this panel, I kept seeing highlights of the NFL Combine coming up on various programs and seeing the broad jump and the vertical leap and the 40-yard dash and the bench press, and I thought, my gosh, how antiquated is this system of evaluating players, especially when we have all this great technology available? And I think that's where I'll start. And I want to know from Matt and Andrew what they think of the combine process and the evaluation of players today, and what they think the future could look like, what they would like to see in the future. I know, Matt, you were there last week, watching the whole process, and then we'll get the technologists, the businessmen, the doctors, the researchers to play off of your ideas.
Yeah, were we at the Combine together? I can't remember. You and I?
I hold this over Matt all the time. How was your Combine experience? Did you go?
You were there 2 years ago. Well, I'm probably biased. I was the draft class of 1998. That was Ryan Leaf, Peyton Manning, and I actually wasn't invited to the NFL Combine. You have to be in like the top 25 prospects to even get there or something like that. I don't know the system, but I got an itinerary but no flight, and I called the guy, and he was like, oh, well, what happens sometimes is a junior will come out and quarterbacks get bumped if another quarterback comes out. So I'm like, well, only one quarterback came out. Ryan Leaf's the only junior that came out this year. And he's like, yeah, so he's going and you're not. And so, you know, I'm probably biased again. And sure enough, he's going to be the number 1 or number 2 pick overall, and he's got all kinds of talent. And he shows up, and he doesn't even run. He doesn't lift. He doesn't jump. He weighs in. He weighed in at 261. I remember being so upset. Like, he weighed in at 261. He hasn't even been working out, you know. And so I am biased, but I was there this week and as a kind of an analyst for a little while for the NFL.com, and interviewing guys like Johnny Manziel and Mike Evans and A.J. McCarron, and it's just funny to hear what these guys are measuring and all that kind of thing, and I laugh at it a little bit, but there is some value in the system, and so I won't be too bitter to not see that.
Yeah, I think it's an incredibly interesting experience. I think there's great merit to the interviews and the psychological testing. I think that's I think teams get a lot out of that, and the one-on-ones, the group setting, whatever setting it's in. As a quarterback, I think it'd be interesting to maybe make a little more football-specific movements part of the combine. We talk a lot. Every game you watch seems to come down to a 2-minute drill, at the end of it to win it. Is there a way to simulate the physical, mental, and emotional stress of a 2-minute drill on a quarterback? And is there a way to quantify his focus or heart rate or the ability to move fast, the ability to make quick, accurate decisions, the ability to be cognizant of time and how many timeouts you have left? We know the most embarrassing thing is you're trying to call timeout and you don't have one. It happens in practice, and by God, you don't want to let it happen in a game. Or, the guys run. You tell your buddy to run out of bounds, but you don't want to run out of bounds because you want the clock to run so you can run it down and kick a field goal because you're already in range. So, is there a way to simulate that? I don't know. But then gather sort of data off of that.
And I'd throw that to Adir and Kezar. Is there a way to do what Andrew wants done?
So I think simulating it is an interesting concept, but your story, your comments about the importance of psychological testing, I think that's one of the great things about the Combine. That's one of the big benefits. And the story that Matt told, the other stories we've got to avoid happening at Combines. And the way to do that, so I'll refer to Australia a little bit through the course of this, because Australia has been deploying this kind of athlete tracking technology for 5 or 6 years, and it's ubiquitous. It's every player in the Australian Football League, in every game, every training, every referee, and also the 300 guys that are going to go into the Combine next year, they wear this tracking technology through the course of the season. So you don't need to make decisions about whether an athlete is going to be a superstar in the NFL or AFL in Australia based on one Combine. You look at the way that they've performed through the course of their season, in college, let's say, and you make decisions based on that, on who the next superstars are going to be. It's a much better way than trying to make short-term decisions or simulate scenarios, is to use real data on a long-term basis to make those decisions.
Okay, so.
And to add to what you said, and particularly, Andrew, your comment, and Matt, your comment about how you like Combine or lack thereof, it has to be sport specific, and then within sport specific, it has to be position specific. So quarterback versus running back, right? And what we've been doing at Adidas is like wearable technology is exploding right now. I mean, most of you have some kind of wearable technology that you or in your family wearing it, right? But with the Adidas heritage, we want to bring it to be very sport specific, right? And for example, heart rate, you mentioned about it, technology that's being used to measure heart rate for a long period of time, right? Now with the technology, you can put that into context. So for example, right, you measure what you're doing, running, explosive running, acceleration, deceleration, but you can also now measure simultaneously what's happening to you, right? So what you do and what your body is feeling, right? And combine the two to get the most relevant information for you. There's a lot of data available now because of technology, but the important part is like how you synthesize that, right? So that it becomes very relevant. And your point about like timeouts and things like that, so the tactical part also becomes very important along with that. So I see the evolution of technology kind of getting there to what you guys are talking about in the future. It's a step after step. Heart rate has been there for a long time now with physical monitoring and then with tactical, so it all comes together.
Now, John, you have created your own Combine, and I know when we talked, you likened the current NFL Combine, the official NFL Combine, to a typewriter when you could be actually using a smartphone. What are you doing in your Combine? I believe you test the top 50 ranked players, college players?
Yeah, each year we've brought in the top guys from the draft, or a lot of the top guys from the draft, and we put them through very position-specific tests. And on sports science, what we're looking for is we've developed a metric that we believe is incredibly football relevant. First of all, the way that players are evaluated within the NFL Combine, they're testing things like a 40-yard dash. If you were to say, well, how important is the 40-yard dash? If you were to say, well, which positions is it even relevant to? People would say, well, wide receiver for certain. But when you take the greatest wide receiver of all time, and just in the last 5 years, there were 200 people at the Combine just in the last 5 years who are faster than the fastest wide receiver ever. He doesn't rank anywhere near the top of fastest. In fact, Jerry Rice is among one of the slower receivers that you would see in the game today, and yet he's the best. So you say, so a 40-yard dash time can't be particularly relevant to that position if the best person doesn't test very high in it. He's not an anomaly. There are many other receivers, Larry Fitzgerald being one of them, who's not considered a very fast receiver and is still elite. So what we look at when we look at receivers, when we look at D-backs, we're looking for a change of direction, ability to stop. The ability to stop is much more important than the ability to flat out run, because a D-back that's covering a receiver is only, Andrew and I were talking before, that the D-back is only going to go as fast as the receiver, right? You can't outrun it. So the ability to stop and to create separation is an incredibly important attribute. For the position of quarterback, when you're looking at the analysis, first of all of our players have to be in pads. They have to be in a situation that in performing activities that are relevant to the actual sport. With quarterback, we look at, people want to say, well, how strong is somebody's arm? Yes, that's an important metric, but what you really want to know is, well, how quickly do they get rid of the ball? Not only their throwing motion, but how quickly do they make a decision? So we put on an eye tracker, we make sure that we see where a quarterback is looking, we see how long does it take them to recognize a target, then after that, how long does it take them to initiate their throwing motion, then how long does it take for the ball to come out? That's an important metric, because you theoretically could get rid of a ball quickly but be a slow decision maker, and that amount of time is what is important. A few years ago, we had a little-known quarterback named Colin Kaepernick in the lab, and he tested the highest of all of our tests, off the charts. We said, we think this guy has a promising future in the NFL. We think he's great, even though he's a fairly unknown quarterback. And it was something that people really started paying attention to, the kinds of things that we were doing.
I think that brings up a good point, which is, what are you doing, as technologists, as researchers, as people who are developing products to ensure that the information you're receiving is valid, accurate, and helpful? And I'd pose that to Adir, Kezar, and John. And then I'd be curious from a quarterbacking perspective. I'm sure a lot of data, or more and more data, is coming in every year. How do you guys sift through what's important and going to help your performance, whether that's off-season training or for pre-game preparation? So why don't we start with the researchers and the technologists, and then we'll move to the players. Adir.
So I think you might have noticed that athlete analytics has kind of become a bit popular now, and it's kind of the merger of two big themes in quantified self and big data are coming together, and athlete analytics sits at the junction of those. And what you're seeing is a lot of guys popping up, a lot of people popping up with little devices or technology or techniques producing data, and that's good, and it's a problem. Because you've got the concept of garbage in, garbage out, and no matter how much you dress it up and how beautiful the graphs look, it's just trash if trash is going in the front end of it. So, one of the big risks that we see in terms of the momentum of athlete analytics that is really sweeping the US at the moment, and I think this is revolutionising elite sport, to be honest. One of the real challenges is making sure that the data is valid. And if you ask somebody from a company, a sports scientist, is your data valid? Either they say yes, or they don't work for that company for much longer. So you can't trust those guys. So what our view is, you've got to submit the technology to independent third-party testing, whether it's a college, whether it's an institute. That is the only way that this entire field is going to stay honest and ethical, is to have third parties involved and third parties validating that the data that's coming out is accurate.
Yeah.
Kezar.
Yeah, and I also believe the same thing from our perspective is just data is not going to do a whole lot, right? When we were developing the My Coach Elite Team system, we went to all the elite soccer teams and talked to the coaches and the trainers, and the last thing they wanted is more data, right? And so the whole issue was how do you make the data that you collect? And thanks to the technology, you collect tremendous amount of data, right? I mean, bytes and megabytes in seconds, right? And how do you then convert to what is relevant, right? And that depends upon the sport. That depends within sport, as we talked about, different positions. And it also depends upon the fact that now we have the ability to collect a lot of different types of data altogether, right? So as I was mentioning earlier, the relevance also comes from different types of data and how you bring it together. For example, again, what you're doing on the field and what is happening to you, right? And if you can then relate the two, that tells you how efficient you are, how well you're training, are you under-training, are you over-training, propensity for injury that's happening, fatigue, all of that then becomes relevant, right? And it's a long process. In the sense is the more data we get, the more smarter we get about it, right? So it would be remiss to say we know all about it right now. For example, with the MLS, we've been working with for about a year. Now, the more data we have, the more information we can generate out of that, and more relevancy we can create. And then the other thing is the data has to be accurate, right, and validated, right? But then if you are collecting the wrong data, it doesn't matter if it is validated or not, right? It has to be the right type of data and brought together in the right context.
Mm-hmm. John.
I think especially with what we like to do is to use data in an innovative way. And really what we go to great lengths is to put things into a context. Data, to me, can just be data, and a number, just because the number is the highest on a scale doesn't mean it's the best. And I think it's difficult for people to understand that it's more important to be in a Goldilocks zone where it's not too hot, not too cold, where you're in this band of you are in the realm of possibility of achieving greatness if you're in this band, but that band doesn't mean you're above it or below it, you're just in it. And making context, like in our combine, the last 3 defensive players, with the exception of this year, we had 3 defensive players running that scored the highest on our metric, all won NFL Defensive Rookie of the Year. And that doesn't mean they scored the highest in every category. It was that these players most consistently scored in that band, in that zone, most consistently. So it wasn't the fastest, it was the best overall in a band. And I think it's important to be able to put data like that in a context, because obviously we are so obsessed with being the highest, but that doesn't mean it's the best.
And Andrew and Matt, how do you sift through whatever your team is giving you or whatever your personal trainers and strength and conditioning coaches are giving you?
The thing that's most glaring to me as a player, as an athlete, is that you see all these wearable technology things, but you're not going to wear it in real life. Like if it's not flexible, conformable, like you put it on, forget about it. You're not going to wear it. Like you might wear it like one time for a study, but you're not going to wear it to compete. You're not going to wear it to train. Even a heart rate monitor. Yesterday over at the Harvard Innovation Lab, we kind of had like a group of different athletes from different sports and talking. And one of the women was an Olympic, U.S. women's Olympic soccer player. They use heart rate monitors more than anybody. And it's just, what is it, a watch and a little thing around your chest right now? Which, it's too much. It's too much. It's too bulky. It's too much. Even for women's soccer. So like, unless it's less than that, more flexible than that, I don't care if it's great data. I don't think my teammates would care. We're not gonna wear it. And I think that's, like, so the data's important, but it doesn't trump like how I feel on the field. I wanna put it on and forget it's there.
I know that was some of the issues you had too, Andrew.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with Matt. I think there's always gonna be a hesitation among athletes to wear anything or do anything that could be a hindrance to your performance. The last thing you want to do is think about another thing as you're practicing even, or in a meeting. We try to make our days as distraction-free as possible. So anything that would be a hindrance, I think is going to be tough for guys to get around and subject themselves to, gathering this data, because I think, the first step is just gathering baselines in a lot of senses. I also think what John was talking about is very interesting, that Goldilocks zone, or the zone you hear athletes talk about all the time, man. How did you do that? That NBA player just went and scored, 17 straight points. And the answer's up, man, I can't explain it. I was just in the zone. I was feeling it. Can you quantify? I guess my question to y'all would be, can you quantify the zone and what goes into that? Because there's certainly, I think, a feel part that you really can't explain, but maybe some of the smarter minds out there up here can explain it, and I think that'd be a very, very interesting step in the analytics.
Let me add something to that, because I think John's point on just data is interesting. So a couple of Pro Bowls ago, we had a quarterback called Cam Newton come over and ask me, how much data are you actually collecting on me when I'm wearing this technology? And I said to him, we're collecting 10,000 data points per second on your performance. And that's a big number, and in fact, it's too much data. And to the point of the zone, what this is really about, it's about the analytics, it's about taking the data and turning it into coach speak, or turning it into player speak, or turning it into a dashboard that is useful and can be utilised and not overwhelming. And if you look at a team like FSU, who won the championship this year, we've been working with Florida State for a few years, and it took them a while to really understand how the data will fit into analytics and how they can adapt their training to maximise their performance on field and hit the band that you were talking about, and hit the zone that you were talking about, Andrew. And I think that is all about the analytics. It's not about raw data coming out of the system.
And the FSU example was they realized that they had a great potential for injury prevention if they used the analytics, and is that one of the directions that...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, the two greatest uses of analytics are performance maximisation and also injury prevention. So you talked about the Combine. We deploy the technology in Australia at Combine, and the number of soft tissue injuries has dropped to 0 at Combine. There are no soft tissue injuries, and that is a result of the technology. And I think that, the other thing players care about is maximising their playing lifespan, and that is fundamentally the reason that we find support from agents. You talk to your agent, and he'll say to you, if this thing is going to make you play for longer and make you play more game time, I love this thing. And I think that's fundamentally important as well.
I see Kezar and John nodding. Yeah. So please, go ahead.
So a couple of comments I wanted to make is for Matt and Andrew, in terms of they don't want to wear technology that either comes in the way or makes them look something different, right? And so that is one key thing that we worked on is for example, when we were looking at heart rate monitoring, instead of starting with a gadget that you got to wear, we looked at what do you wear normally, right? I mean, if you wear a regular compression strap, how do we put technology into what you already use and wear so that it's as ubiquitous as possible and you don't feel that, but you get the benefit of it, right? And you saw at least one of those shirts that we have, and I mean, I welcome Andrew for you to take a look at it also. And the second point, John, you made about consistency. The technology that we have today now actually enables you to do that, right? Consistency within training or within game, but equally importantly, consistency from training to training, right? Within the season, and also now you can go and look back from season to season. So that actually hopefully helps in that respect as well. So it's not a one-time thing.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, going to Matt's point about not wanting to wear stuff. So part of the thing that we do is we look at, like you were saying, of what do you already wear. So having censored balls and censored gears that are where technology is invisible, but also there have been huge leaps in advancement in wireless motion capture, in markerless motion capture, where you don't have to wear any sensors at all. It's just triangulated footage, and you're basically getting a human being that's occupying space over time, and you get tons of amazing data with no technology being used on the physical player. What's really important in going toward and it's funny, coming from a sports science perspective, we love to put those things in context of, like, you can put somebody in a lab, you can test them, you can use it as predictive, whatever, but ultimately the most important thing you can never simulate in a test, which is how do you perform when the game is on the line. You can pretend all you want in practice, you can pretend in a laboratory setting, but that setting is so unique that no metric is going to tell you, is that person going to succeed or fail, until you see, well, how did they do in that kind of a situation? And that's the great X factor that we can't let data sort of replace our own judgment on someone's character and ability to perform under crisis in a situation, because you just can't simulate that in a lab.
I'm just curious, I know what you, Matt and Andrew, I know what you don't like and don't want, but what do you actually do? I mean, how much data do you actually take in as part of your everyday training, and how useful have you found it in preparing for the season?
I think, or at least I take data in the most, is not a personal metric, and it's not about my body. It's about the opposing team. We get a playbook. And this may be the wrong road to go down to, but I think it's sort of interesting.
Go for it.
All right. We get a playbook. We get a scouting report. We get every bit of information you could possibly think of on the opposing players, on their style of defense, on how they conform to certain things, what happens in 2-minute drills, third down, red zone. You guys know it all. And so what Matt and I do is sort of sift through it and ask the question, okay, what is pertinent for this week? What matters? We can't memorize everything, and it's not just memorizing, it's memorizing and being able to use that information and apply it in an athletic setting, and to be able to see, okay, they're playing cover 3 with this front, and we've been told, through research, we know that they do that 75% of the time. So even though it looks like cover 4, we know they're coming to cover 3. We got a pretty good feeling for that. But you can go on and on about those things, and some things we just say, we're not going to care about that. We don't care about that piece of information right now. It doesn't matter. But there's that one time where 99.9% of the time, this defense, when they line up in this front, they're going to do this blitz, and we're going to call the play that scores a touchdown, and if they do it again, we're going to call the same play and score another touchdown because they're idiots. So it turned, we sift the information in a sense, and so that's my day-to-day sort of numbers.
Have the Colts ever offered or asked either of you to try out any of the personal metrics, any of the smart shirts like from Adidas or any of the other?
So like I kind of like ripped on the wearableness and like the comfort, but
you've done it.
That's in competition. But athletes, we would love to be guinea pigs on something when we're not competing. Like, we'd have no problem trying out. We do. We try out, like, sales guys and people are pitching, our trainers, our strength coaches, our coaches, our players, our agents, everybody. And like, you get something every day, and like, you're like, well, all right, I'll give it a try. We have things. We had this thing this year. We're getting to play somebody, and they put this like mask on so you can barely breathe, and it was like training. Like, it's like, this is what it's like to compete at altitude where the oxygen's low. And I think you actually got mad. You were like, wait, was it you? You're like, this is bad. But we're willing to try. We're willing to try stuff. Like, we try so many different things. One thing we tried this year was like just like a simple corrective posture shirt. You know, this company wanted us to wear it while we were throwing. And we were like, yeah, there's no way, we're not gonna do it while we're throwing, but I'll tell you what, we'll do it in between practices. And we both came to like it. Like, we came to like it a lot, and then you started wearing it in practice, and then I saw him wearing it in practice, so I was like, all right, I'll wear it in practice, you know? And like, but I think it works the same way with technology, with the different devices, whether it's a tracking device or it's like a stimulation or it's a compression or gives you real-time data, which is very important, but you need to know what to do with it. But like from my experience, you know, like I use like the wearable technology you wear on your hand. I love those. Those are great, but I don't wear one to compete because like I can't. I'm not going to wear it in a game. And like the same thing, I used this example the other day. LeBron James, he might wear one, he might not, but he's not going to wear it in a basketball game. It's too clunky for real sports, like competitive sports.
So we see here how, oh, I'm sorry, John, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, yeah, just even addressing the point, you know, we've had over 700 of the world's greatest athletes in the lab. Athletes love data. They love, because they're just curious. They're, you know, when you're, what's interesting is athletes, as great as they are, it's just like being at a carnival when you break out scientific data. You're like, I don't know how high it is. I'm curious. I really want to know how good I am relative to everybody else you've had in your lab. And that's why that context is so important, because athletes do love to get information. During a game, you know, they just want to focus on the game, but wanting to know off of the field, you know, well, how good am I and how can I use that to even get better? One of the real appeals of sports science is then that the greatest athletes come into our lab because they feel like on that day they're going to learn something and hopefully be able to apply something to get a little bit better just because it's something brand new that opens a new world to them.
So we've seen,
I said one thing. I think that the comment that Matt, you make about wearables, if an athlete is aware of wearing some technology, that is a failure of the technology. That is a failure of the technology. And you know, we work with 400 clubs globally, a lot of NFL clubs, a lot of NBA, with loose shirts, and we never get complaints about the wearables. We never get complaints from the athletes about wearing them. So as soon as you're conscious, you know, if you're conscious of a Fitbit or something like that, that is a failure of the technology to slot itself into your day-to-day activities. That's my view on wearables.
I was going to say, we get a sense that athletes are eager to adopt the technologies, but I'm just curious from other people's perspectives, researchers, developers, technologists, what teams and leagues are most receptive when it comes to adopting technology? And I know, Adir, you had talked to me about Everton in the English Premier League, which is quite an interesting example.
I mean, I can tell you what teams are interested. They are teams that are not the richest teams, but they are on the cusp of greatness, and they can't buy their way to greatness, so they are looking for a competitive edge. They are the early adopters of this technology. Everton, which is a football team, soccer team in the UK, they will go and use this technology because it will give them a competitive edge where they don't need to have endless checkbooks to go and buy players. In terms of the leagues always follow the same theme in our experience with data. The first thing they do is they resist, and then clubs start buying the stuff and athletes fall in love with it. And I agree, John, with your comment, athletes love data because they can compete against each other with data. The number one reason why running backs love wearing this stuff is so that they're faster than the other running backs. So don't worry if it's relevant or not relevant, they just want to be faster. You know, and so you get pushback from the leagues, and then what happens is that the clubs demand from the leagues that they are allowed to wear it in games as well as in training to close the performance loop, and then eventually the leagues embrace it, and that's generally the process that it follows. So, you know, here in the US, the NBA's been great, the NFL's been great. Division I college is absolutely fantastic in terms of embracing this stuff. You know, that is, but then you have lacrosse. I mean, lacrosse is a big emerging sport in college in this country, and the lacrosse teams really embrace this type of thing as well. So it's really diverse and really varied.
John, I'd be interested to hear about the league that isn't embracing.
Well, you know, to us, it's pretty obvious when you're talking about American sports, and that, you know, baseball is so far behind everybody else. They're just such a sport of tradition, and baseball as just a sport for whatever reason at the elite level just doesn't want to change anything. They just want, look, we want, and we use it as a great example. We've done this test 3 different times, that we keep saying, you know, if you swing a weighted bat in the on-deck circle, your bat speed goes down when you go to the plate because your brain is used to something heavy and now it doesn't have to exert itself as much. So if you really, truly want to swing a bat faster, you should swing a wiffle ball bat in the on-deck circle because the heavier object will force you to work harder, which will increase your bat speed. But you'll see guys with 3, 4 bats throwing, where like it just slows your bat speed down, but whatever, I guess it's the tradition of the sport. So that sport is definitely, they're not gonna listen to whatever, it's just tradition. But the sport that's really embracing technology is NASCAR. I mean, those guys are so far out in front. I mean, anything they can do to shave off 1,000th of a second, they're gonna do. I mean, it's pretty remarkable the amount of technology when you watch NASCAR. People are, what's fascinating is people are like almost associate NASCAR with, oh, you're just going left all day long, right? It's all you're doing. You're like, there's so much science loaded into that moment, it's pretty staggering.
Our experience have been is like in terms of athletes adopting technology, it's like a spectrum, right? Some are very willing to do that and others will follow as it comes along, right? My experience was like so many years ago when we first went to the Jacksonville Jaguars with the technology, the trainer asked 3 or 4 players to wear that, right? And they complied, but not all of them, right? And the others were standing around and sitting and then they're looking at the data and then say, why didn't you ask me to wear it also? So that's how it sort of comes. I mean, same thing that you did, right? I mean, you saw Andrew wearing it, you tried that, right? I think it's evolving, right? And it's probably evolving faster and it's our job to make sure that the technology does not come in the way, right? And that is how we make sure we develop it so that like whatever you do, the technology supports that. It is not an add-on to that. And I think it's going to happen sooner and faster than what we see now.
So say, do you as researchers and business people and technologists and as athletes worry about the other applications of the technology in the future? And by this I mean, all of a sudden teams could have access to a great amount of data about each individual athlete, and come contract negotiation time, they can be pointing out numbers where they're looking more at the numbers and some raw data that is perhaps not as favorable to you. I know there are elite performance researchers who are trying to figure out the best way to predict when a player is past his prime. And how do you feel as athletes about this data in contract negotiations or just in terms of allotment of playing time being used potentially against you when you're trying to use it to improve?
For me, it's similar to your injury history. I mean, the facts are the facts, but what they can't measure about you is, what's inside of you, your heart, that kind of stuff. But that is a real trust factor with athletes and teams and being willing to do it. I think part of it is like, who owns that data? Does the team own the data? Does the athlete own the data? Like, that's a topic for discussion.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the trust, it just comes back to trust.
There's, unfortunately, I think especially in the NFL, there's a culture of if a bone's not sticking out, if you can walk, you're going to play. And the less you have to tell an athletic trainer, the better, because it won't be used against you if you're trying to get that 2nd, 3rd, or 4th contract. And it's a dilemma. I think Matt and I, we both are very upfront with our trainers because we hope that they have our best interests in mind, and I think they know that we have the team's best interest in mind, and what happens down the road happens down the road. But I've heard stories of things being used against players or players complaining about this, and but yeah, the trust. I think you've got to get to that level of trust and respect between all parties, and then I think you can get better easier.
John and Kezar, or Kezar and John.
And I'm thinking that, it's sort of a trade-off in terms of the benefit that the athlete gets versus some of the potential downsides of that, right? And it is our job, along with sports science and the data crunchers, to make sure that the benefit that you get in terms of improving your performance, reducing injury, helping you extend your career, that far greater outweighs. One of the things that I had not thought about, which I think you mentioned, is like you would rather see technology being worn by the other side and you have the data, so that you have the advantage of it, which might be more difficult.
Well, that's how it is currently, really. We're not monitoring ourselves. All we do all week is study them.
Right.
Like first thing we do is we write down the name of the defensive coordinator, what his resume is, where he's been, who his influences are, what his tendencies are, and then we study him. And like, we just engross ourselves into this guy. Our playbook's probably that thick. Our stats are like that thick. And we get up on the board and we write, so what? Like, so what? Like, what does this mean to us? And I think it's the same thing that we would be interested in with like information on ourselves. You get all this data. So what? Why do I care? What do I do with it?
I think the age that we really need to be entering, what I hope that, what we really strive to do is to provide context. And I feel like rather than even saying we're in the age of a technology explosion, I feel like we want to be in the age of context application. That the so what is the most important question, because I feel like if you go down the road of relying too much on data and you enter into this brave new world where an athlete theoretically could be evaluated on the likelihood for an injury to occur that hasn't happened, but it might occur and they might be more susceptible. And if that athlete is passed over because this data is taken too far out of context, it just and you can totally see that happening of saying, wow, these two guys, these are great, but this athlete might be more likely to sustain a particular injury, even though that injury may never happen, the probability could be higher, therefore a decision being made. That's a bad day to me. That's the wrong thing, because think of the number of amazing athletes that on paper, or if their body was scanned, they would have been weeded out. But it's that context and what does it actually mean and how much should I value that? That's really the age we should be entering, because we do have this explosion in data.
What I would say about these guys, you guys have got a pretty good union. They represent your interests pretty aggressively. You've got a bargaining agreement, and in your bargaining agreement, it talks about data and wearable data, and they do a job of kind of protecting you from that data being used unfairly. I think that that's going to be one of the interesting things that plays out, the way that the leagues and the unions interact over all of this data and what it can and can't be used for. And I'll tell you a positive thing that's being used for from a player and a league's perspective. So when players are cited for an infringement and they're brought before the judiciary and they're going to be missed games, so in some leagues around the world, they will actually call in the data, because this stuff is being won in games, and when the player says, I really was trying to decelerate and avoid that collision, they bring in the data into that room and they say, let's assess whether that is real, and that has happened on many occasions in other parts of the world, and they will exonerate the athlete and support his story because of the data that is coming off that device in the game. And I think that's pretty special for that to come out of the data.
That's cool.
We talked a lot about athletes and the development process, but you mentioned, John, putting it in context, and I'm just wondering, how much of this is an education process, particularly with coaches? You have coaches, agents, but coaches and GMs, getting them to understand. And I'm also wondering if the athletes find themselves, young guys bringing some of the technology and kind of educating their coaches or their trainers or their GMs, saying, hey, let's try this, or can we try this? So John, how much of the context part is education and to the players?
I think there obviously is a generational there's a generational gap. Obviously, you have an older institution. You have a bunch of scouts at the NFL level that have been around forever, and they have their certain way of doing things. Then you have a new breed that might be too dependent on it. And sort of being able to apply that context is an education process. I think that we can compare it a lot if people remember, when the advent of word processing. All of a sudden, people are like, well, everybody's going to be able to publish their own whatever, but you still have to have the ability to write and craft and use that tool. So I feel like we're in the advent of this explosion of technology, but you're going to have to be able to craft what that actually means, to have it mean something that's meaningful to the organization. And that's really the age where we are right now, is because it's finding itself. And we've been around for the last 7 years and have been very fortunate to be able to experience a lot of technology. There's so much technology that doesn't really mean anything, but there's a lot that's really positive and can be used in a very positive way if the education and the context is applied.
And Matt and Andrew, you mentioned being at the Harvard Innovation Lab. Do you find yourselves bringing stuff back to the team, educating your coach, or perhaps proposing something to your athletic trainer?
I think, players, we do that. There's a window where your season's over if you're not in the Super Bowl, basically when you're out, till April 21. That's kind of our window as football players. And we take stuff back that we learn. He trains, all over the country, really, Europe some too, maybe in maybe Denmark? Denmark? Don't you have a guy in Denmark? He doesn't want to seem like but he's very forward on that stuff. And I'm all around the country trying to learn different things, Canada. But I've found that coaches don't really want to hear it. Coaches are old school. They want to coach they want to coach football, they want to coach, they may listen a little. Doctors, but physiotherapists, trainers, and strength and conditioning coaches, they're all ears. They're kind of the problem solvers. It's been my experience in my locker rooms. Those are the guys that have great ideas. They read about some of these same people, technologies, advances for fun in their free time. It's what gets them going.
We've seen it really vary at different clubs. So you're right. Strength and conditioning coaches universally are interested in this kind of stuff, but at somewhere like the New York Giants, it goes all the way up to the top, the level of interest. So it is incredibly variable at different clubs.
And Andrew, what's been your experience?
Yeah, I think and it can be a two-way street a lot of times in my experience. And granted, I'm only 2 years in, Matt's 50 years in. 16. But I think when you have a team working together, and our trainers have history with something that has worked, they'll encourage us to try it. If we don't like it, it's not a personal vendetta again. We won't use it. They know that, and then we bring stuff and try and incorporate it to make our team better. If it works for us, the coaches try and learn it and teach it to the other guys. Hopefully, I guess the rising tide lifts all ships.
Kezar, you looked like you wanted to chime in.
I wanted to comment on the same thing. Is like bringing this into the right context. It's going to be a very collaborative effort, right? It's not just either the athlete or the trainer or the coach or the technologist or the sports scientist. As long as we can work together in terms of understanding what the real needs are, translating that in terms of what needs to be measured, how do we make it contextual, right? And then also the possibility of then using real information. So you measure these things and you can predict this thing, but if you can also relate that to outcomes, right? And that will be the strongest correlation that will come out in the future. So that's a very strong collaborative effort that's needed together. And I think we've got all the pieces together and we've got the building blocks to do that.
We've got about 17 or so minutes left, and I just wanted to throw one question to everybody about what the future looks like. I know we've talked about wearable technology. We haven't gotten to in-ball technology. There's now technology where you can put devices inside footballs and soccer balls and track what happens with the equipment. But just quick comments on what you think the future looks like, and then we'll turn it over to the audience for questions.
In-ball, absolutely right. So we've had in-ball for NFL balls you guys don't know about for the last couple of years. They're not deployed because we've got to get some friendly support from the league, let's call it. But yeah, in-ball technology works across a whole variety of different sports. I think indoor tracking is the other big thing. So a lot of these stadiums are inside and you want to see positionality with a closed roof, so that's another big one. And the third thing is moving past the basics of measurement. So the basics are everybody wants to know GPS. Where is the player? How far did the player run? It's moving into things which are inertial movements. So the micro movements where you might start a movement and then you change your mind and you move to somewhere else, and that's what lets you complete the pass, is the speed with which you can adapt your movements. They happen in fractions of seconds. They're not picked up by GPS sensors. That is going to be the real next wave of improvements, so inertial sensor-based technologies.
So,
I think it'll be embracing and hopefully more of the unobtrusive, invisible sensors, conformable, stretchy, indestructible, that on the skin. I know we talked a lot about that yesterday at the Harvard Innovation Lab with the MC10 folks and Paul over there in the audience and some other athletes. And to us, to me at least, it'd be so much easier to wear that and play and not be a hindrance, sort of going back to what we talked about earlier.
Yeah, and I think the things that matter, all those things Andrew said, and then things that matter, it doesn't matter the sport, hydration is really important. Knowing your hydration levels, there's got to be a way to test for that other than what color's your urine, because that's how we do it right now. There's got to be a better way. The other thing is just with all the impacts to the head, no matter what sport it is. It could be women's soccer, it could be hockey, it could be lacrosse, it could be anything. Is there a way to, we know very, very, very little. And not saying that we can solve that problem now, but if we at least start collecting accurate data now, maybe generations to come will play with better technique or make the sport safer, those kinds of things. Technology can definitely help us in those areas.
okay, so.
Yeah, and my view for the future is a lot of things that are already happening now in terms of athlete monitoring. It'll continue to get better. Technology will make it more unobtrusive and easy to use. But it's a huge opportunity for with a lot of different dimensions. So for example, I mean, we'll continue to work on the athletes, but it'll also trickle down to sort of secondary athletes and college level, school level, also at consumer level, very sports specific. I also see this technology helping not just improve performance, injury prevention, but also in fan engagement. That's going to make entertainment even that much more relevant and information. I mean, you just think about how do you put it on the other team and get that data to you so that you can make better decisions, then that's going to be the tricky one. But the dimensions are multifold in this thing, and I think it continues to evolve and get better. The key again, that is like if we have the right cooperation together, we can make that data into much more relevant and useful information in a very timely fashion.
John?
Yeah, I think that we're entering a really exciting time. What I'm most looking forward to is there, becoming a standard, that there will be a day when there is a standard of this, these are the metrics, these are the devices, these are the things, this is the nutrition, we're entering into all right, there's kind of a standard that we can build off of. We're still defining what that is, which is exciting. But the rules of the game, the play of the game, I believe it'll continue to improve as technology creates a standard that we all can agree on and say, yeah, that's making everything better.
And now we'll turn to some audience questions. This one goes to Andrew and Matt. What is the most important piece of knowledge you learned from analytics that you would not have known on your own?
Good question.
Third down, blitz tendencies. That's the number, that's our day. Thursday, like we play games on Sunday. Thursday is the third down day, and that's our study day. That's our final exam during the week, so to speak. And that's the so what time. Third down is where a quarterback makes his money. I have a number in my head. I don't know if I should say it, I'll just say it. I'm near the end of my career anyway. 35% or more if they're bringing two blitzers. If they're bringing one blitzer, I don't care. If they're bringing two blitzers or more than 35% of the time. Why that number? Mike McCarthy was my quarterback coach in Green Bay. He had that number. It's worked for me. And you find out that these defensive coordinators, I don't know what their system is, but that's the number that works. And so it's finding that number. You need a Mike McCarthy in your life to tell you what the number is that matters. But that's the number one thing for me. It's the very first thing I look for.
And now I've found that number because of you.
Paying it forward.
But yeah, I think third down and red zone, the situational aspects of football are so important to any game and really make or break any game.
There's a more follow-up on what will be the impact of technology on injury analytics and the prevention of things like ACL tears. Now, I know we talked about the benefits of analytics in preventing injuries, but will we be able to get that specific in terms of saying, don't do this, or you're overworking and you're heading toward an ACL tear or an Achilles tear or some sort of shoulder injury with a pitcher?
So that's not the future, that's the present. I mean, that is where we're actually today. So you look at the clubs that are wearing this, you look at the players that are wearing this, they are training using something called periodization, which you guys might use as part of your training. This data feeds directly into that periodization. They should have a good understanding of the level of risk that they are carrying for a soft tissue injury every time they train, every time they go out onto the field. That is today. I mean, that is the type of thing that this stuff is working for today.
Anyone else want to comment on injury?
Yeah, and I think I agree with the fact that we've got technology available to be able to look into that. The key challenge there is what are the false positives in there, right? Okay, so when do you not stop when you shouldn't be stopping, right? Okay, so let's say 80% of the time it's about right. I mean, the judgment comes in the 20% when you should not have stopped somebody because there wasn't an injury. So that, I think, is going to be the critical part of it, right? And that we will gain by getting more data, by putting more relevancy to that, looking at the outcomes and making it even better as we go along.
John?
We definitely are getting better, especially in the medical community. There are definitely advances that are occurring. Again, I'm looking forward to that day when, it's less fuzzy. There's definitely a lot of fuzziness that's still going on because we're trying to figure out, even what does make something more likely for an injury to happen. We're still figuring that all out, which is great. But I do think it ultimately will, even if we play it on the safe side, that's probably a good side to be on.
But the question is, when you have that, the bigger question is, when you have that data, who decides whether that player is going to go out and play? Because we see situations where, if it's a tight finish and there is a risk of injury to the player, That coaching staff may want that player to go out and run that play. So who makes that decision when you have that data at hand? That's where the challenges are going to be in this space.
You could lose a Michael Jordan flu the night before the game and then goes out and scores 40 whatever points, or there's stories in every locker room of the guy who's on one leg who makes the game-winning catch, for a touchdown. I think that the heart desire, can you quantify that, and where does that come into it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to say, in a somewhat related question in terms of what you see and what the data tells you. There's a question here for Matt and Andrew. How do you balance what you see on game film with the data you receive? Obviously, particularly when there's a contradiction between the two.
Just context. You see the context. We'll see all this data, and we'll get a spreadsheet, and it'll say, oh, hey, they're 60% cover two, which means they're just playing coverage, they're not blitzing. 60% cover two the last 3 games. On 2nd and 7 to 10 or something like that. But then Andrew will sit there. He's really studious and hardworking. He'll say, "Well, did you look at the score of the game? They have a 14-point lead in every single one of these games. Let's go back and watch the 3 previous games. Run the same stats on that, and it's easy for us to run the stats. And run the stats where it's actually a close game." And all of a sudden, it's not 60% covered too. It's 30, 40. It's all mixed. So just really having context in all things, just like John was saying earlier. But that's key.
And Andrew, what
I agree, the context, and that's what I've learned from Matt. I think more than anything, he has his experiences. He's so quick to jump to, well, this doesn't matter because of the score, or this doesn't matter because of who they're playing, or we're not like that team. So putting it all into context is something I struggle with as a young player, and it's great to have older players and coaches that we all communicate sort of team effort in that quarterback room.
And there's some defensive coordinators, there's some that are just old school and unwilling to change, but there's some that are getting it. I think the offensive coaches on their staff are going to them and saying, hey, this would really screw us up. And so what you see happen sometimes is they've won the game. And then they'll just start dialing these plays from all over their playbook just to screw up your stats. And so you really rely on our coaches that you'll get a MO on someone, and you say, you know what, we're not going to take the last 2 drives of the game. Or you clump them together. Hey, in a 16-game season, when everything in the world was on the line for them, when it was 4th and something to win the game, what did they do? And it might be a bunch of different things, but you can put it in a big, in like a Goldilocks zone, so to speak. Like it was some sort of man coverage, press in your face, and definitely bring in the house. Or you might say, hey, they're going to just rush 2 guys and just make you make a mistake. Whatever it is, you pick through, you throw out the bad data that they're trying to trick you in a sense.
Somebody wants to take further the talk about what happens with contracts and draft status, and asks, will we see players losing draft placement or contracts based on predictive analytics?
Well, let's get to predictive analytics first. I mean, that's the holy grail, is to get to predictive analytics. I think there is always a heavy worry about all of the negative ways in which new technologies can be used. I think that all of that stuff is much less likely. I mean, the comments that Andrew has made and that Matt has made about the heart of the player, which let's call it the psychological profile of the player, I think that is still fundamentally important. I mean, the guy that really wants to win somehow pulls it together, and the job of the data and the job of the analytics is to maximise his likelihood of being able to do that. And that is the way that we see the interplay between those factors. So I would worry less about how this is going to have an adverse impact and deny opportunity, and more about how it's going to maximise performance, minimise injury, and extend the playing life of guys that are playing at the moment.
Just curious, do you have any idea how long you might be able to extend the lives of players? I mean, is Andrew going to be the beneficiary of guys who are playing 20, 22 years? I don't know if that's, in the league.
If Matt deploys quickly, he's got another 35 years in him, I guess. I think that it's still emerging. I think this stuff is still emerging. Definitely we're seeing players play longer in leagues where this has been deployed for a long time. It's not the average tenure in the NFL, as everybody knows, is 3 years or sub 3 years. So I think you've got a lot of room to go, and mostly the tenure is not to do with injury or fitness or skills. It's to do with other factors or a combination of those factors. So I think that fundamentally the reason that Matt had a long career was not solely down to he performed well on analytics or he was really fit. There's obviously something special there that is elongating that career, and I think the aim is to try and maximise the potential that individual players have, not to take averages of what careers are and how long careers are.
It's also it's also measuring the right things. John talked earlier about Jerry Rice not being the fastest at the combine. I played with Jerry Rice, who's a teammate of mine, at the end of his career. So when he was, in theory, the slowest he's ever been, he still got open because he was good at something. What was it? Maybe it was running fast enough and then being able to stop and run quick out of it. He was great at something. And so measuring the right thing is very, very important.
And that's the Jerry Rice example. When we had Jerry Rice in the lab, and it was obviously at the very end of his career. What was interesting is that he knew that he wasn't that fast, and that's what it was hugely influential in us developing our metric, because we're like, well, we're gonna take the greatest of all time and listen to what he said. He's like, it's way more important that I knew where I was going. That guy didn't, and I could stop faster than him. It doesn't matter how I have to be fast enough, and that's that Goldilocks zone I'm talking about. By no means, Jerry Rice is not a slow human being. He's obviously faster than everybody else, but relative to the guys in the combine numbers, he's not super fast, but he's obviously fast enough, and that's what's important is getting that thing. And one of the things I didn't mention earlier was, in terms of putting things into a context, F equals ma, force equals mass times acceleration. And I always love to point back to that, because when people get all hopped up about how big somebody is or how fast somebody is, I'm like, so is it good or bad to have a giant force number? Like, the greater the force that you generate, you as that athlete experience that amount of force every single time, which might explain when you have these giant defensive ends, the injury rate on the larger the human being, the more likely they are to get injured, because they're experiencing more force. And when they say, well, they're big, they can handle it, it's force is force. That's what they're experiencing. A smaller player might actually have an advantage that they're not experiencing as much force. So being able to take that number and put it into a context that means something to football is important.
I'm going to end on this. We have a couple minutes left here. I just want to end on this. The question, what do you want to measure in the future that you are currently unable to measure, and have everybody go through what would be on the tops on their wish list?
Mine's very simple. Maybe too simple for all these sharp minds in here, but an accurate pitch count, like a pitcher. I think we do it by eye a lot, but take the human error out of it, that element out of it, and just be able to see how many times I've thrown the ball. Training camp's always a struggle for quarterbacks. You throw 6 days in a row, heavy, it's hot, and maybe being able to say, okay, you threw this many times, and at this point, your legs gave out, and you just started throwing all arm, and you got out of the Goldilocks zone, if you will. So that pitch count sort of, I'd like to see.
Idir, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, my view is it's not about measuring more. I think we're probably measuring enough stuff now. What it's about is getting better. There's a lot of talk about hardware. Actually, the software has become at least as important as the hardware, and the software is about the analytics. And I think the next thing that we are focused on doing is being able to customize for position, but even more specifically for player. So you've got your strength and conditioning coach, or with data being fed up to your head coach, and it is specific to you within your various positions, and it can help you perform within your various positions. I think we're probably 6 months away from something like that, maybe less, but that is really, to me, the holy grail of hyper-personalization down to the individual athlete in the individual position.
To me, the future is about measuring what's happening on the field during training or during game, but also looking at a very holistic measurement of the athlete, right? What's happening in between, what's happening to the rest of the day, what's happening from a sleep perspective, what's happening from a nutritional perspective, so that you get a complete picture of the athlete, and how do you then help the athlete do better. We talked about, like, overall from an athlete performance perspective, how do you increase the career of the athlete, right? So definitely these things will help in terms of extending it, but also helps in training them better sooner, so that from a rookie to a sort of getting full form, you help that also. So you extend the total life of fully active performance, right? That's number one. Number two, in terms of from a contract standpoint, right? There is already information that's been used to make those decisions. I see this as another tool, right? Not necessarily replacing everything or being very definitive, but one more tool that helps in making that decisions or making those judgments, right? So from a future perspective, we just need to hone this thing together. There is a lot of technology available right now for looking at the athlete throughout the day, and we need to sort of bring it together so that you get a much better picture.
John, Matt, anything on your wish list?
I just, recovering, like as a football player, you're at practice for 2 hours, maybe you work out for another hour. The rest of those hours in a day, you're recovering. And what's the best way to recover? Like, what's the best way to get a good night's sleep? What's the best way to sit in a meeting? We sit in meetings all day. If we're not on the practice field, we are just sitting in meetings. Is that the best thing you can do? Should we be standing? Should we be getting up and exercising every once in a while? Like, should we be wearing something? Should we be, like, what's the best way to have active recovery or passive recovery or active rest? Like, I don't think anyone knows, and it's probably a missed opportunity in my mind.
I think on the practical level, I think you're going to have balls being censored within all the major sports, so that there's no controversy whether or not it crossed a goal line or whatever it is. That technology exists right now. It's whether or not the leagues want to implement it. And then just on a testing level, I think that having on a testing level, I think really even looking at, I think the psychology of sports is really the frontier that we need to dive deeper in, because that championship gene, that championship, how do you perform under pressure, is something that you really need to look at, because that's really what matters, is how the heart that somebody has, the will. It's really hard to test for. There aren't great tests for it right now, but I think that as we strive to create some sort of better understanding about what it takes to perform in that moment, it's certainly a great goal to want to figure out how to look at the psychology even more.
I know this could never happen. We talked about yesterday. How cool would it be if you're watching a football game on TV and Adam Vinatieri's coming out to kick a game winner, and his heart rate, he's wearing a heart rate monitor, and you're watching it on TV. And like most games, like we play with Adam now. You guys probably know him a little from the Patriots, but his heart rate would probably just be like steady, but then like some rookie kicker would be like, like it would just be so fun. And I know it would never happen, but like it'd be so fun.
Never say never.
Yeah.
On that note, I'd like to thank you all for coming. I know we ran a little into overtime here, but thank you all for coming.